Hey there everybody, how's it going? Nice to see you again. So today I wanted to talk about how to move away from using your camera on program mode. So you got your nice new fancy X-E5 and you learned how to set all the settings and the lenses and the dials to the orange A settings. Or if you have another camera that has a P or auto, you set it to auto, everything's auto. And you just click away, and with today's technology, that's pretty much all you need to do to get some nice photographs every once in a while, which is really amazing. Back in the days of film, if you didn't quite figure out what you were doing, it could cost you a lot of money. But nowadays, you take a picture and you look on the back, and maybe you've learned to dial in some exposure compensation, and you have no idea what the camera's doing, but you're getting nice photographs. And hey, maybe that's all you want, and fair enough. I mean, no problem. But if you want to take it further, what's your next steps? Well, I was talking to a fellow this weekend, and that's where he's at. He's got a Canon Rebel 5 Ti, I think it is, and he's just shooting on program mode. And he's learned how to set everything to program mode. He has no idea what any of the buttons and dials do, but he's learned to set everything to program mode, and he just hopes for the best. And he's wanting to, he's got a passion for it, okay, and he's wanting to go further, but he doesn't know where, how, what. I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, if this was my first camera and I knew nothing about photography, I'd be overwhelmed, okay? There are so many settings on these new modern digital cameras that it's just not clear. Like, what do you learn first? What's your priorities? Well, that's what I'm going to try to hopefully make a few suggestions and straighten that out for you. Where's the next place to go? When you want to move beyond program mode, what do you need to study? Okay, where do you need to go? And the three things that we're going to talk about, two of them are extremely important, and it's pretty much what photography is all about. And the third one is a modern thing, but we'll get into it. We're going to be talking about shutter speeds, apertures, and ISO, okay? So think of your camera as a pipe, all right? And instead of carrying water, instead of transporting water, you're regulating water, your camera transports light. Used to be to film, now it's to your sensor, okay? So there's three components of that. Number one, there's the size of the pipe. A bigger pipe can carry more water at one time than a smaller pipe can, right? Okay, that's pretty clear. And then there's how much time you allow the water to go through the pipe. So think of the shutter speeds as a valve. So your aperture in your lens, the iris closes down or opens up. That's the diameter of your pipe, okay? A bigger pipe lets more water through at once. A smaller pipe lets less water through at once. Your shutter speed is a valve. How long is your valve open for, letting the water into the pipe? Okay, in this case, it's light. If that isn't clear, and if that confused you more, watch it a few times until you get it, okay? I don't have an analogy for ISO, because ISO is different. What ISO is like the bucket, maybe. That might be the analogy. The bucket at the end of the pipe that'll collect the water, all right? It's not a good analogy. But your ISO is the sensitivity of your sensor to the amount of light you let in. So all three of those things interact with each other, all right? In photography, we talk about stops of light. Okay, which are, stops is just a fancy word for unit, a unit of light, all right? And If you increase your aperture and you let more light in, if you decrease the length of time that you let that more light in, you can, so if you increase the amount of light being let in with a bigger pipe, and you decrease the length of time you let the water go through the pipe, or light, by 1 unit each, you've achieved the same thing, all right? And what do I mean by that? Well, f8 at a 60th, so if I set my camera, I set my shutter speed to a 60th of a second, okay, and I set my aperture, so a 60th of a second is length of time, and my aperture is f8, that's the size of the iris in the lens, okay, the size of the pipe. If I go a 30th of a second at f11, which is a smaller pipe for a longer time, that's the same thing. That's the same exposure. If I go the other way and go f5.6, which is a bigger pipe, and I go 125th of a second, that's the same thing. It's the same exposure. That's assuming the ISO doesn't change, all right? So if you want to learn and go beyond program mode, the first thing that you need to do is learn the language. This is my recommendation. Maybe you have a lens that has an aperture ring, like this beautiful 16mm f2.8 Fuji X-F prime lens. Love this lens, and it's really gorgeous on the X-E5. But if you have a lens that has an aperture ring, and maybe that'll focus on that right there, take those numbers in that order and write them down on a piece of paper and memorize them. That's the first thing I would recommend. F2, 2.8, 4, 5.6, 8, 11, 16, 22. All right? You need to memorize that scale because it's going to be the same for every lens. There might be a few numbers at one end and more numbers at the other end, but the middle is going to be the same. And each one of those numbers is one stop of light. So from 2 to 2.8 is one stop, from 2.8 to 4 is one stop, from 4 to 5.6 is one stop. It's 1 unit of light. It's what we would call a whole stop, all right? On that same small piece of paper, you can look at your camera and look at your shutter speed dial, all right, if your camera has a shutter speed dial, or look it up online. And I would write down from 1 second, which is easy to get your brain around because we time some things in our lives in seconds. Well, we count seconds on our clock, right? We get 60 of them to a minute. So a second is easy to understand. Where your photography lives is in tenths, hundredths, and thousandths of a second. Mostly hundredths, but tenths and hundredths. But anyway, so what you want to write down is 1 second, half a second, quarter of a second, eighth of a second, 15th of a second, 30th of a second, 60th of a second, 1/25th of a second, 2/50th of a second, and 500th of a second, maybe 1,000th of a second also. All right? You can write that on a little Post-it note, stick it in your pocket, and as you go through your day, look at it every once in a while and memorize those scales. The third scale, you don't really need to memorize this. This isn't as high a priority because it's pretty easy, is your ISO numbers. Start at 100, so 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200, 6400. I mean, it's a linear progression. It doubles every time. It's not a big deal. And you get the idea. Okay. So those are the 3 scales you need to memorize. Once you've got those numbers down, then you can start understanding what those are your 3 major controls for photography. The most important of all 3 would probably be your aperture, which is the 2, 2.8, 4, 5, 6, 8, 11, 16, 22. that's probably what you want to control the most. What that does is it controls how much of your image is in focus. If this is infinity and this is 1 foot away, okay, if you have a smaller aperture like f16 or f22 or f11, anywhere from 2 feet to infinity with a wide angle lens like that 16 millimeter is going to be in focus. Now if you open that lens up to 2.8 and you're focused at 10 feet, you're going to have a lot less in focus. And that's one of the major controls. It's called depth of field. Okay, most photographers, that's what they are controlling when they're taking a picture. If you want a shallow depth of field where a lot of your image from the foreground and the background is out of focus, but your subject is in focus, like on a portrait or something, you want like to be wide open at f2 or 2.8, okay, right? And then if you're doing a landscape and you want everything from 3 feet to infinity in focus, you want to stop down, close the pipe down to, let's say, f11, f16. We won't talk about diffraction at this point, okay? Just understand the two parameters and how changing your f-stop works. In the days of film, you had to go out and you had to test it, you had to write it down, you had to look at it, see what it looked like. You've got digital now. Just take some pictures at f2. Remember that the aperture deals with the focus and how much is in focus and how much isn't in focus, okay? How much is blurry. And then go out and play with it. Keep your shutter speed. First of all, get your camera off of program. Turn everything to manual so things aren't sliding around, including the ISO. And go out, take a picture at f2, take a picture at f5.6, take a picture at f11. Look at the same subjects. Look at the different pictures and see how they change. And that's the way to learn how apertures work. Then set your aperture to, let's say, f5.6 and do the same thing with your shutter speeds, but you're not going, unless shutter speeds deal with motion blur, okay? A fast shutter speed like 500th of a second is going to freeze the action of moving subjects, whereas a slow shutter speed of like half a second on a tripod, keeping your camera steady, right? It was going to make your waterfalls nice and silky, okay? So shutter speeds deal with motion blur. Aperture deals with focus, how much is in focus, how much isn't in focus, and shutter speeds deal with what is moving or not moving, okay? And those are the two main primary controls you have. There are some rules of thumb, not so much with apertures. Well, with apertures, with your f-stops, and f-stops and apertures are the same thing. With your apertures or your f-stops, that's the same thing. So 2, 2.8, 4, 5, 6, 8, 11, 16, 22. That scale that's on your lens, the size of the pipe, the rule of thumb is if you want very little in focus, open it up, big pipe, f2, f2.8. If you want a lot in focus, close it down, make the hole smaller, f8, f11, f16, okay? That's the rule of thumb for apertures. The rule of thumb for shutter speeds, if you're hand holding your camera, and we're not going to talk about in-body image stabilization here. Just turn that off when you're trying to learn. Set it all back to program and turn everything back on if that's how you get a photograph, okay? Because you don't know how it all works. But while you're learning, turn everything to manual and turn the in-body image stabilization off. Turn all the automation off, okay? So this way you can see what's working and what's not working and how it works and what it does. All right, the rule of thumb for shutter speeds, if you're hand holding the camera, it's based on the focal length of your lens. And the formula is the focal length of your lens. If you have an APS-C camera like a Fuji camera, you multiply that by 1.5. So let's say you're shooting with a 100 millimeter lens. Multiply that by 1.5, so 150, okay? In order to handhold a sharp photograph with a 100mm lens, you need a shutter speed of higher than 1/50th of a second. Okay? So you don't have, I mean, unless you go into third stop settings, you don't have 1/50th, you have 1/25th or 2/50th. On this dial, you will have 1/25th or 2/50th. If you want to absolutely be sure that the shot is sharp, go to 2/50th. If you can't go to 2/50th because you don't have the light, try it at 1/25th, but be real steady. All right, that's the rule of thumb for shutter speeds. There's one more rule of thumb for these three settings, for these three scales, and that's for ISO. The rule of thumb for ISO is you want to use the lowest number ISO that you can so that you don't introduce unnecessary noise into your photograph. Take a photograph at 6400 ISO. Take the same photograph at 100 ISO, or if you have a Fuji camera, it's a 1/25th or a 1/60th, and look at the difference. The 6400 ISO image is going to have a lot of noise. It's not going to be as sharp. Okay, the 1/25th or the 1/60th ISO, not 1/60th, 160 ISO setting is going to give you the highest quality image that you can get out of the camera. The lowest ISO that you can set in your camera, so 100, 125, 160, which we also call the native ISO, is going to give you the highest quality photograph. Going back to that concept of highest quality photograph, your aperture somewhere around stop to down a couple of stops is going to give you the highest quality out of your lens. So on this particular lens, it starts at 2.8, it goes to f4 and f5.6 and f8. This lens is going to be sharpest somewhere around f5.6, a couple of stops down from wide open. Doesn't mean you can't get a beautiful photograph wide open at f2.8, but this lens will be of its best quality. You will get a couple of stops from wide open, and that's true of almost every lens on the market. All right, and shutter speeds don't affect image quality, except for if you shoot it handheld at below that formula I gave you, you're going to introduce camera movement, which might be blur. There is a technique called ICM, intentional camera movement. We used to call that a mistake. But people are being creative with it, and so who am I to judge? All right, I've probably confused everybody, but here's the deal, okay? That's photography. There's nothing else beyond that in terms of set your camera to manual. If you understand all that and you know how all that works, you understand photography. I mean, there's a lot more to it, I get that, but that's the basics. That's where you start. Turn your camera to manual. Make sure you have to pick the shutter speed. You have to pick the aperture. You have to pick the ISO so they're not moving around and the computer's not judging them. And then the next step to go after that is to turn your metering mode to spot metering and start metering different zones. But that's a different video. So I hope that helped somebody, and this is real basic stuff, but nowadays these cameras are so automated that I know when I got my first Pentax ME Super and I had no idea how it worked, I just kept it set to auto mode, and back then it was only aperture priority, which is okay. I mean, that's what most photographers shoot anyway. That's what I shoot most of the time, and that is I get to pick the aperture on the lens, the 2, 2.8, 4, 5, 6, right? And the camera can pick the shutter speed, and nowadays the camera can pick the ISO too. All right, and I have no problems with that. That's, a lot of photographers shoot that way, and a lot of you professional photographers shoot that way. I shoot that way. And also they have the camera set to spot metering, or you use the exposure compensation. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. That's the place you want to go when you want to take your first steps into the waters of how your camera works and how to get off program mode. Stop letting the camera take the picture for you. You get the control over the camera. And you can start learning what your apertures do, what your shutter speeds do, and how your ISO works, how all three of those things affect your image, and you've taken your first steps. So there it is. For all my long-term watchers and subscribers, I know you guys are old pros at all this stuff, so, you know, but we've got to pass it on to the next generation, you know, and if it were me and I had one of these cameras, these new cameras, I wouldn't know where to go beyond setting it to program. So hopefully I've nudged some people to experiment. And the beautiful part is it doesn't cost you anything except your time and a little bit of frustration and making your brain hurt, because it's free. You can take as many photographs as you want, but do it in a systematic and scientific way where you don't have the camera choosing anything, and you can see what the changes you're making do. In a way, it's more difficult to learn, but in a way, it's a lot easier to learn if you take your time and really have the passion and want to learn it. All right, so if you found this video helpful and you want to support my channel and what I'm about here, it's just please subscribe. It's the #1 thing you can do to help out a small channel, and it means the world to me, and it makes me want to keep doing these videos, because I think it's awesome when the subscriber count goes up. That tells me I'm doing a good job, and I appreciate it. And the past month has been fantastic. We've gotten a lot of new subscribers, so welcome everybody, and thanks for watching. All right, we'll see you out there. Have a great one, and bye.